You're listening to The Reclaimed Life, a podcast about recognizing manipulation, reclaiming your voice, and rebuilding a life that actually feels like your own. I'm Rachel Paxton, an author, ordained chaplain, and certified mental health coach. And each week I'll explore the patterns, dynamics, and turning points that help people rediscover who they truly are. There's a kind of grief we don't talk about very often. Not the grief of losing a person, not the grief of losing a relationship, but the grief of realizing you're no longer the person you used to be. We spend so much time focusing on healing, growth, and becoming that we rarely acknowledge something important. Sometimes becoming someone new comes with loss. The loss of old identities, old coping mechanisms, old ways of relating to yourself, to other people, and even to God. In today's episode, we're talking about the grief of becoming someone new, the complicated emotions that can arise when healing changes you, growth changes you, and life changes you in ways you never expected. Because sometimes growth feels less like a celebration and more like saying goodbye to a version of yourself that carried you through a season you could have never survived any other way. There's a kind of grief that arrives when healing starts working. Not because something went wrong, not because growth is bad, but because becoming someone new often means saying goodbye to who you used to be. We talk about the grief of losing people, the grief of losing relationships, the grief of losing dreams, but we rarely talk about the grief of losing versions of ourselves. And yet, some of the deepest griefs happen there. Sometimes healing changes you so slowly that you don't notice it at first. You just start responding differently. You stop chasing certain people. You stop explaining yourself as much. You stop fighting battles that no longer belong to you. You stop trying to earn things you used to desperately need. And one day, you look back and realize, I don't see the world the way I used to. I don't think I respond the way I used to. I don't think I'm the same person anymore. And that realization can feel surprisingly emotional. Because sometimes you miss the old version of yourself. Not because you want to go back, but because she was familiar. She knew the rules. She knew how to navigate the life you were living. She knew how to survive. Maybe she was the peacemaker, the fixer, the over-explainer, the caretaker, the one who always found a way to keep relationships together, the one who worked harder when things got difficult, the one who believed if she could just find the right words, explain things clearly enough, love people well enough, or try a little harder, things would finally make sense. Maybe she wasn't healthy, but she was familiar, and there can be grief in letting familiar things go. I think one of the hardest parts of growth is realizing that some things only make sense for a particular season of your life. The people-pleasing made sense. The hypervigilance made sense. The overthinking made sense. The constant need for reassurance made sense. Many of those things developed for reasons. They were adaptations. They helped us survive. And there's something compassionate about being able to look back and say, thank you. You got me here. But I don't need you to lead anymore. But there's grief in that too. Because sometimes the things we're letting go of are the very things that once helped us feel safe. And when they begin falling away, there can be a strange sense of vulnerability. Almost like learning how to walk differently, learning how to trust differently, learning how to live differently. There's also grief in realizing you can't unknow what you know now. You can't go back to old understandings, old perspectives, old identities, old ways of relating to yourself. Sometimes even old ways of relating to God. Not because your faith disappeared, but because it deepened. Because life taught you things. Because grief taught you things. Because healing taught you things. And now, the old framework no longer fits. Sometimes becoming someone new changes relationships too. People who are comfortable with the old version of you may not understand the new one. They still expect the fixer, the rescuer, the over-explainer. the person who always says yes, the person who always keeps the peace. And when those roles begin disappearing, relationships can shift. Some deepen, some grow stronger, some quietly fade. And that can be painful because not everyone grows with us. One of the hardest griefs is realizing that some people only knew the version of you that was surviving. They never got to meet the person underneath, the person who emerged after the healing, the person who found their voice, the person who stopped abandoning themselves to maintain connection, the person who became more honest, more grounded, more whole. And sometimes there's grief in knowing they may fully never understand who you have become. But maybe that's part of growth too. Not everyone's meant to understand every chapter of our story. Sometimes becoming means carrying parts of your journey that only God fully witnessed, parts that changed you in ways that no one else can completely see. And maybe that's why grief and gratitude can exist together. You can miss who you used to be and still be thankful for who you are becoming. You can honor the version of yourself that carried you through impossible seasons without needing to become her again. You can appreciate what survival taught you without wanting to live there forever. Because healing is not about rejecting your past, it's about carrying it differently. And maybe becoming someone new is not about becoming someone else at all. Maybe it's about becoming more fully the person God was shaping through every season, every loss, every disappointment, every act of survival, and every step of healing. And maybe the grief is simply part of realizing that some versions of us were never meant to stay forever. Thank you for listening to The Reclaimed Life. If something in this episode resonated with you, you're not alone. Many people are beginning to recognize unhealthy patterns in relationships, systems, and environments, and discovering that reclaiming their voice is possible. In future episodes, I'll explore topics like recognizing manipulation, understanding narcissistic dynamics, rebuilding self-trust, and learning how to create a life that actually feels like your own. If you'd like to explore more of these ideas, you can visit my website at thereclaimedlifepodcast.com, where I share additional writing, resources, and future episodes of the show. Until next time, take a moment to listen to your intuition, trust what you're beginning to see, and remember that reclaiming your life often begins with one honest question. This is the Reclaimed Life.